All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining today. My name is Aaron Yee, and I'm co-hosting this session with my colleague, Rick Weinberg. Today's session is focused on a problem that I've been wrestling with for almost my entire career. I've been in identity management for a while. And that problem is, how do you manage identity life cycles for disconnected applications without it being manual, painful, and then error prone? So if that resonates with you, if you're running into that problem, this session is perfect for you. But before we dive in, I just want to give you a quick sense of where I'm coming from because I want you to know that it's not just a product pitch. This topic is personal for both me and Rick. As I mentioned, my background is almost entirely on the technical side of identity and access management. Started out as a developer, and early in my career, I was creating provisioning workflows for the Air Force as a government contractor and building these workflows in Sun Identity Manager with Express. So how many of you remember that technology? Uh, After that, I moved on to Okta because I could see that they are doing something that the legacy identity vendors weren't doing, and that's solving identity for the cloud era. And that was back in the early 2010s. And then more recently, I joined Cerby for a very similar reason. Cerby is solving a problem that major identity platforms still aren't addressing, and that's what do you do with all the apps that don't support modern identity standards, disconnected applications? And I heard that problem raised by customers again and again when I was at Okta. Nobody had a clean answer for it. Cerby does. And that's what we're here to talk about today. But before we do that, Rick, you also bring a deep identity background to this conversation. Can you share a little bit about yourself with the audience?
Yeah, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Rick Weinberg, VP of Product here at Cerby. Thanks, Aaron. Yes, we do share some commonalities. I've been in the identity space for, gosh, going up to 20 years now. And yeah, this has definitely been an ongoing challenge for many organizations over the years. I think progress is made, but there's always room for more improvement. And I think, hopefully you'll see at the end of the day that there's some real value to be had there. And yeah, like Aaron, we actually share something in common, Aaron. I too worked for an express line of a large company's identity management product. In this case, I worked on TIM Express, was actually the first product that I managed, Tivoli Identity Manager Express. Many moons ago, didn't do so well. Be that as it may, excited to talk with you today about this topic.
Great.
Aaron?
Yep. Next slide, please. So here's what we're going to cover today, and I want to be deliberate about this because we designed this session to give you real actionable insight, not just a product tour. Our goal is threefold. First, we're going to examine why traditional identity platforms like your IDPs, your IGA solutions struggle to automate lifecycle management for disconnected applications. If you are an identity practitioner, you probably have some instinct for why this is the case. We're going to put a sharper point on that. Second, we'll walk through the security, the compliance, and the operational risks that these gaps introduce. It's not just a workflow inconvenience, it's meaningful risk exposure that most organizations are underestimating. And then third, we'll show you how Cerby bridges that gap, bringing the same kind of automated controls that you're used to for your other core connected apps, now for your disconnected apps, all of your disconnected apps in your environment. So here's the thing. I'm willing to bet that everyone on this call has both connected and disconnected apps in their environment. And the goal is to build a strategy that can handle both. So let's get into it. There's a deeply held assumption in enterprise IT, and it is understandable. And that assumption is that eventually every application, every vendor will support modern identity standards like SAML for authentication, and then SCIM for provisioning. The thinking goes, vendors will eventually get there. We just need to wait it out. And in the meantime, we can manage the exceptions manually. I hear this constantly from identity practitioners whenever I go to conferences, whenever I talk to folks, they think it's fine, except it's not. And the reality has not matched the assumption. So here's the thing. Application vendors actually have legitimate reasons for not supporting these standards. One, engineering complexity is real. Implementing SAML and SCIM take real identity expertise. that most product teams don't have. And even if they are able to build it, the ongoing maintenance is pretty problematic. Two, on top of that, most SaaS vendors are running lean with competing priorities, and identity standards adoption rarely drives growth for them, or it rarely shows up in product demos. It stays at the bottom of the product backlog until enterprise customers make it a hard requirement to purchasing it. And then there's the economics, right? For vendors who aren't primarily selling to large enterprises, there's really no financial incentive to build these capabilities. And for those who do, you guys see this, they often lock them behind premium tiers of licensing, which is known as, the SAML tax for authentication, and sometimes even the SCIM tax for provisioning. So the result is that SAML and SCIM adoption is still far below 100%. SAML is a little higher and SCIM is very low, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But the gap isn't closing as fast as anyone had hoped. And meanwhile, the number of applications keeps on growing, right? SaaS sprawl is real, shadow IT is real, and even on-premises and legacy environments, they're not going anywhere. So the manual management of disconnected apps has become the norm, right? It's not the exception. And manual management leads directly to security risk and operational drag. And what most people underestimate is they think disconnected apps aren't high risk apps. They think they're low risk edge cases. But we often see that these are actually business critical tools holding sensitive data, right? These disconnected apps are HR systems, financial platforms, collaboration tools, even proprietary internal applications. So the assumption that these apps are low risk is one of the most dangerous assumptions in identity. Next slide, please. So I want to put some numbers behind this because the scale of the problem is important to understand. 93% of applications lack SCIM provisioning. So read that again. That's only 7% of apps have SCIM support. That means the vast majority of your application portfolio, the tools your teams actually use, cannot be managed through standards-based provisioning. And this isn't getting better. Application adoption keeps on increasing. It's accelerating faster than identity teams can handle it. It's accelerating faster than the vendors are putting standards into them. So every quarter, organizations are adding new SaaS tools, deploying new internal systems, inheriting legacy applications through mergers and acquisitions, and the gap in the portfolio just continues to grow. So the result is a proliferation of disconnected applications, and with them, increasing security risks. That's the structural problem that Cerby was built to solve. It's not a workaround, it's not a patch, it's a purpose-built platform for disconnected applications. Next slide, please, Rick. Before you go further, I want to make sure that we all are using the same terminology because a disconnected app can mean different things to different people, and you might have heard alternative terms such as non-standard apps, unmanaged apps, etc. We think about disconnection in two dimensions. The first dimension is authentication. Does the app support SAML or OIDC? Can you connect it to your identity provider so your users can log in via federated SSO? If the answer is no, the app is disconnected on the authentication side. You have no centralized control over it. The second dimension is provisioning and the lifecycle management angle. Does the app support SCIM, or does it expose user management APIs that your identity platform can then build connectors to? Can it use it to create accounts, update roles, deprovision users? If the answer is no, the app is disconnected on the provisioning side. Now, here's the important nuance, and this is something that surprises a lot of practitioners. An app can be federated with SAML and still be disconnected because it doesn't support automated provisioning via standards. So it's partially disconnected. You might have SSO working beautifully, but if the app can't support SCIM, if it doesn't support provisioning, it's disconnected in our view. Next slide, please. So why do disconnected apps create risk? What happens when you have a significant portion of your ecosystem outside your identity controls? The first is security risk, right? When provisioning is manual, accounts get created with more access than necessary because it's easier to over provision access than it is to figure out the exact right permissions every single time. And when people change roles or when they leave the organization, deprovisioning is incomplete or delayed or not even handled at all. And so the result is persistent access that shouldn't exist, which is textbook identity risk. And this is pretty common in breach threads and investigations. The second is compliance risk. If you cannot automate lifecycle actions for an application and you're relying on manual effort to do this, you don't really have a reliable auditable record of who has access to that app. There's no authoritative source of truth. So when auditors ask for evidence, and they will, you're kind of scrambling to pull together all of this information with spreadsheets and tickets and emails. So audit findings in this area, disconnected apps are really common. They're increasingly common. And then regulators are paying just closer attention to this. Lastly, it's operational drag. This is probably where you feel it the most. Manual provisioning means tickets, right? Lots of tickets. It means someone, an application administrator, maybe IT, has to provision or deprovision access whenever an employee joins or leaves. It means access reviews are really painful. So these three risks compound each other, and they all trace back to the same root cause. Identity platforms weren't designed to manage apps that don't speak their language. So this is where Cerby comes in. Think about your modern identity architecture. You likely have an identity provider like Okta, Entra ID, Ping, handling authentication and provisioning. You might have an IGA solution like SailPoint or Saviynt, to do governance and access reviews. These are excellent tools, but they all share the same limitation. They work by connecting to the app via standards like SCIM or perhaps user management APIs. And if the app doesn't expose those types of interfaces, you really can't reach those platforms. So there's a gap. Cerby sits in that gap. We integrate with your existing stack, your IdP, your IGA, and we extend their reach down to the applications that they cannot connect to natively. So this includes SaaS apps without SCIM support or user management APIs, but it also includes on-premises apps. It includes legacy and homegrown systems, tools that your business units have procured and now manage on their own manually. So what used to be disconnected now can be fully managed and secured using your same identity tools, your same processes. Those have now just been extended to disconnected applications. Cerby complements what you have. So what does Cerby do? I'll give you a clear picture at a functional level because I want this to be concrete. It does three things. First, it extends the controls you already have in your IdP and your IGA system down to disconnected apps, just like we talked about on the previous slide. It integrates with your platforms. It doesn't replace it. And Cerby listens for, lifecycle events, a new hire, a role change, a termination, and then it executes the corresponding action in that disconnected downstream application. Your current identity investments just get extended. It becomes a lot more powerful. Second, Cerby connects the applications that your identity platform cannot, and that's how it actually does it. So that includes SaaS tools, that includes on-prem apps, and so forth. If there's an app with a user interface, Cerby can connect to it. And lastly, Cerby automates the identity controls that you're used to. And you would otherwise have to do this manually for disconnected apps, but these are the same identity controls that you use for your connected apps. So that means automated account provisioning and deprovisioning, automated credential management, which is kind of new to these disconnected apps, policy enforcement, and visibility also into your disconnected apps. So the bottom line is Cerby closes the gap. Every app it can be managed. Every access decision is auditable. It's clean and it's automated. Now I'll hand it over to Rick, who will take you through some of the use cases where Cerby helps out, peppered in with his great knowledge of this space.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so I think, to start, we see a number of our customers just really looking to leverage, as Aaron pointed out, their identity provider to just provide some core join, remove, reliever provisioning. In many cases, it can be sort of push-based, event-driven, right? If there's an event detected there, it might be tied to user creation. It could be a group assignment, right? That ultimately triggers downstream changes to those disconnected apps that Cerby manages, right? And so in this event, as Aaron pointed out, Cerby is responsible for executing the provisioning policy that is defined. In this case, say it's Okta or it could be Entra, right? And making sure that we align that desired state with the current state, so to speak. And so as we look at this, we're really helping you eliminate manual provisioning, for those apps that are not SCIM enabled, right? And we do those, as Aaron touched on, for you know those SaaS apps that don't have modern identity, protocol support, or on-prem apps, whether those exist, in a browser-based app behind the firewall, it could be a thick client-based app behind the firewall. And that's either because, again, they don't support SCIM, or as Aaron touched on, they don't have user management APIs, and at the same time, we don't intend to drive and create integrations for where there already are out of the box connectors, from your IdP or even your IGA for that matter. And so, as many of you know, the benefits here are very tangible and real. I mean, you not only have faster time to access, so the users can be much more productive, than they perhaps were, and just get them there as quickly as possible. The reduced manual workload, right, not only helps reduce the cost to support that, but also it reduces potential for error, right? And you're not having to make perhaps fat finger a provisioning event as an example. And of course, there's time to offboarding as well, and or suspension of access, right? That is vital for ensuring so it strengthens the security itself. And of course, providing the relevant auditing logs to ensure that you have what you need for compliance purposes, right? So there's that side of it as it relates to again, the joiner mover leaver lifecycle motion from the IDP. I would say, to complement that, we see this from the IGA, the Identity Governance Administration side of the house, in particular, where Cerby provides lifecycle and compliance automations that really extend those governance workflows, right? So not only can Cerby do this, or sorry, do we support that same scenario where you might have an IGA provider, but it extends beyond that to these additional governance workflows. So we do this by, first, of course, aggregating user and entitlement data, to perform a regular synchronization, aggregation. This, of course, provides the ability to deliver effective governance so that you can constantly have a clarity on, what that, native state is on the disconnected app and how that harmonizes back to the IGA system of record, right? And so how does this manifest, right? It stems from across a number of different governance use cases. Again, whether that's part of the automated JML lifecycle or even as part of an ad hoc user request that's been approved, right? As it relates to compliance, right? It might be tied to an access certification campaign where a user's access is determined no longer needed. Maybe they moved on to another project, or maybe it's tied to a separation of duty policy scan that identifies a conflict. In many respects, Cerby doesn't necessarily care what drives it. Again, we're serving the policy, we're executing the policy that's defined by your IGA provider, and we're executing against that. And so all those scenarios call for a need for remediation of access, which we execute against. And so, as we look at this, of course, that data synchronization also has benefits just on its own relative to visibility, to truly improve your organization's security and compliance posture, because now you've been able to extend and bring these apps that have been out of your visible control underneath that sort of perimeter, if you will. So now you have visibility and can see a given a given user's access, on that particular app, and that will certainly simplify your auditing and reporting and need, particularly for your access certification campaigns, and in many respects. So as we touch on here, as you bring that in, you now don't have to run your certification campaigns for those disconnected apps by, say, a spreadsheet, or even at the same time, not having to drive, these automations, even ad hoc, where they might be tied to a trouble ticket, as an example. And so, we just find that there's a real opportunity to continue to complement and extend the value you've already invested in with your IGA provider, and how you can extend that much further and build that security posture up. Not to mention, the compliance to support the compliance needs that you have. Um, so how do we do this, and how is it different? I think first it's looking at the traditional approaches that we've seen to solve this problem. I mean, I touched on it just a minute ago. We see a number of instances where you might get some visibility, right, via a flat file, or perhaps you've leveraged a JDBC connector to, bring in users and their access, users and their accounts, so you can see that, and there's value in that, of course, but you're still dependent on a manual execution via trouble ticket, say in ServiceNow, right? And so it's nice to get some of that visibility, but you're not getting the benefits of the automation itself. And so in other instances, you might have investments for building a custom connector, right? And while there's value in that, it has proven to be quite costly. As you can see there, at the same time, it takes a while to develop and ultimately deploy. And not to mention, and probably even most importantly, they can be quite brittle to maintain. Especially when you might be leaning on a third party to support that, it becomes quite complex. And so where Cerby comes in is we can certainly, not only look first at our app inventory that continues to grow, but drive rapid configuration and or creation of those integrations themselves. And at the same time, do that in a matter, of days to weeks, not, weeks to months, right? In terms of what you're getting. And most of all, we manage it for you, in terms of the maintenance itself. And we'll talk a little bit more about how, but in terms of, managing drift and how we can apply fixes, so there's self-healing associated with that.
I'll also add
Um,
too that there's probably some apps that you can't even connect to, even if you wanted to, via traditional connector building, because maybe the apps don't even have SCIM or APIs you can build against, even if you wanted to build something there.
yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, I think many of these apps are, as you touch on, exist because they don't have the reason just kind of they don't have the APIs, right? They might be in some cases they have internal APIs that are undocumented, but invariably, they're very hard to connect to. And we however have means to do that, and that kind of is a segue into the next slide here. And how do we scale and manage and connect to these apps to begin with? I think first of all, when you're in a situation where that integration doesn't exist in our inventory and you're looking to have it built, how do we do that? Right. I think the first thing is you've got to be able to observe how that, how the workflows that are associated with that particular app that you want to ultimately create an integration against. So when you're dealing though with an app outside of the identity perimeter, you're going to be dealing with the line of business, right? And in many cases, there's going to be explicit workflows that the app owner has created to support that. But we need to observe how the user uses the app. So many rare cases, we lean on a Cerby extension we call Scout to enable the user to train Cerby on how to carry out those different workflows. That might be, creating a user, changing an attribute. It might be offboarding a user, and these different lifecycle automations, right? And as in the case where we don't use the APIs because they don't have them, right? And so we interface with the app against a UI, that you leverage that browser extension, or in this case is leaning on undocumented internal APIs. And ultimately that data that we collect as part of that can be fed to us in a sort of a DOM structured data format, right? And it goes through an encryption process, converts that, in a way that is then ultimately assigned with a key to your particular workspace in Cerby, right? And that helps ultimately create the integration. The challenge with that, though, is once you've created that baseline, we feed that to our machine learning models, but we have to monitor change, right? And so if there's a change to the app itself, we need to find a mechanism to be able to manage against that and support you. And so what we do today is we detect when there's a change that's made, and evaluate, are we aware when we isolate that's a change relative to that application and not something that's on the customer's environment or to do with Cerby. We then will evaluate, is this a known set of drift where we can auto heal directly, and we'll apply the fix once that's the case. And a majority that's the time that's the occurs. Of course, there are instances where that fall outside of that, and in that case, we still have a human in the loop to support that corrective action. And when that is done, it's a question of how do we then feed that back into the learning mechanism so that when we apply that fix, the models continue to learn, so that self-healing expands. And again, we have a broader and array of known types that we can then self-heal against in the future, and don't require that human in the loop. I think the key here is that that whole motion is the plane of the app creation itself, right? And once we actually do that, one of the things that it's important to note is we are very particular about the approach we take there, but we're not using that agentic model, where we lean on our the training itself, but also to manage self-healing. We don't do that to run the workflows. We are very specific about running the workflows separately. We have a deterministic execution engine. And the reason for that is because we found that even in the recent, contained advancements, on the agentic side, the when an agent directly interfaces with the apps, we've encountered two things. One is still a significantly high hallucination rate. Like anything over 1% is high. And in some instances, depending upon the app, we've even seen it up to 40%. So we don't want to, of course, drive these critical identity automations when you have that degree of unpredictability. And then secondly, leveraging agentic capabilities that needs to reason and interact with the UI, at runtime can be very slow. And so we want to take this combination of a deterministic execution engine with, on the running of those workflows, coupling that with a very, AI-centric approach to create them, to drive the scale that we need. And so that's the realm of, the app creation, and putting that in, if you will, into operation. Once those app integrations have been published, the integration between the IDP or IGA and Cerby has and that's been established itself. We then can enable lifecycle automations to happen, and here we generate a SCIM gateway that connects to the disconnected app itself. And then when that gateway provides essentially SCIM endpoint capabilities to the app, and enabling it to receive those notifications. So in that example we mentioned earlier, we might be triggering an event from the IDP, and that's where a group provisioning group deprovisioning event has been detected. And then once we've received that, we can then verify the operations performed and perform that provisioning action within the integrated app itself. But let's take a look at actually how we do that. I'm going to just shift over here for the sake of the demo gods, so to speak. I am doing a super demo instead, just to walk you through this. But as we do that, it's important to showcase that. Oops, did I lose you? No, there we are. That in particular, we're going to showcase a provisioning and deprovisioning event from a SaaS app, in this case, Amazon Developer Hub. And in that event, we're going to showcase basically just how we look at rolling this through, again, just granting Paul Turner, who's a user here, in a provision event, and then we'll deprovision as well. And so this, you'll see we're in Cerby. This is our integration dashboard. And as part of that, you'll have a list of your different integrations here. And then if we were to drill into the developer hub, in which case we're going to showcase provisioning for here, you're going to get a lot more depth in what's available as part of that. And so, within that, you can see this particular integration is up to date on this particular workspace, when it was last updated, what was the last workflow type, when there was a synchronization performed with that target app, what were the numbers of users and roles were brought back forward, giving you that detail that you're seeking. This, of course, is an integration that's already established. We're not taking you through the creation of it and how you configure it. But in this case, when we actually want to take on a provisioning event, in this case, we're going to leverage Okta in this case. So we've switched out of Cerby. Now we're in Okta. And in that event, for Okta, again, they're defining the provisioning policy, ultimately, and then Cerby's executing against that. Well, in Okta, as we look to assign a user to a group. In this case, we've defined an Amazon developers group in Okta that is particularly for any users that are the marketing role in Amazon developers can be assigned this particular this particular group. And so when you drill into that, you can eventually see, first of all, that there are no particular users, provisioned in this particular role. And then when we drill in further and you want to assign a user to that, it showcases the potential users that can be assigned to this particular group. And so in this case, we're going to select Paul Turner. And as we do so, we can drill in, and of course, we're doing this to showcase this individually, but this, of course, can be done via API and scale. But if you were to add Paul, that will then trigger the SCIM event downstream for us to execute that provisioning event. Once Cerby receives that, we're now back in Cerby. We'll go into the developer HUD. We then complete that provisioning action. In this case, you're now looking at our automation log, which details the status of each of the events that has occurred. In this case, we have a provisioning event that's occurred, and in this case on Amazon developer to showcase that Paul has been. So to go back out, we'll go into Amazon developer, and you can see Paul Turner is now part of that marketing role that we have assigned him as part of that group-based provisioning that originated in Okta. So that brings into the provisioning side of the equation. The same thing can be held true onto the deprovisioning side. So if we're back in Okta and we want to initiate a deprovisioning event, again, whether that's triggered here manually or done automatically by the policy, you would click on the X to remove, and that would trigger the group removal, assignment removal that is within Okta, which again triggers Cerby downstream. And again, when you go into our automation log, you see that indeed a deprovisioning event has happened, in this case on Amazon developer, business hub or developer hub as part of that. And so when you go back out to Amazon developer, Paul Turner is no longer there and has successfully been deprovisioned. So that gives a quick summary of just a demo of provisioning and deprovisioning event to a SaaS app that does not have SCIM enabled. Obviously, would love to be able to showcase a little bit more detailed demo for those of you that are interested, going forward. But with this, I'm going to turn it back to Aaron, and let me pick up where we left off. If I can just go back to my screen, I think I've lost it. Forgive me. There we are.
Perfect. If you can go 2 slides forward, Rick.
Oh, here we go.
So we have several customers on this slide, and we won't walk through all of them today, but I want to spend a few minutes on Monday.com because their story is one that I think will resonate with a lot of you. You might know Monday.com as a work management platform. And what you might not know, though, is that by 2024, they had surpassed $1 billion in ARR growth, and they had grown to more than 2,100 employees. So they had phenomenal growth. During that time, their IT team had connected, they use Okta. Their IT team had connected close to 150 applications to Okta using, SAML and SCIM, but they hit a wall. They had hundreds of remaining applications that simply did not support these standards, and they had no way to automate provisioning via Okta. So their director of global IT, Lior, he said, "Hey, we hit a wall. Traditional identity tools can't bridge the gap. What do we do?" So to them, that gap created real operational cost. Their team was spending more than 3,300 hours per year managing identities manually. That meant new hires waited days for access. Shared accounts required manual password resets. Audits were just a complete pain. And Monday.com evaluated, whether they should build custom connectors to do this, or they even looked at robotic process automation to do this. And they realized that neither of them would really scale to their needs. And so that's when they found Cerby. The value was pretty immediate. Once they integrated Cerby, I think they got close to 200 apps integrated in 1 year. Like these are apps that weren't in Okta. So they got 200 apps integrated with Cerby in 1 year, which is unheard of if you're an implementer. And disconnected apps started appearing in the Okta dashboard alongside everything else, which is pretty neat. Cerby handled the authentication for those applications in the background. So that includes like credentials, filling in the MFA, but even doing credential management. You want to, rotate the passwords for these disconnected apps every 30 days for security purposes, all without user intervention. And then lifecycle management became fully automated. Access was granted on day one to new users. Access was revoked when it was supposed to get revoked when someone, left the organization across every disconnected app. And the impact was pretty dramatic. At the start of 2025, only 20% of their apps were centrally managed. By the middle of 2025, that number had jumped to 78%. So that was all done with Cerby's technology. And the results were those 3,300 IT hours that were spent manually managing these apps disappeared, right? So that saved them more than $400,000 in lifecycle management costs, which equates to a 280% ROI. I'm not making these numbers up. I'm reading them off of the case study on our website, and you can go there for more details. So that's real outcomes at real scale. And Monday.com is representative of what we actually see across our customer base. Next slide, please, Rick. So that's what Cerby looks like in practice. I want to close with what it means for your business because ultimately that's the conversation that matters. The headline number is an 85% reduction in manual effort. And that's not theoretical. That's what our customers are actually experiencing when they deploy Cerby across their disconnected application portfolio. And I want to unpack what that actually translates to in practice because the number only tells part of the story. It means faster onboarding and offboarding. New employees get access when they need access, including all of the disconnected applications. And when someone leaves, that access is terminated completely and cleanly. It means stronger security and audit posture. There's no more orphaned accounts, no more over provisioned access sitting around because no one got around to cleaning it. No more scrambling around to produce audit evidence from spreadsheets. Cerby gives you that auditable record for these disconnected apps. And of course, it means reduced ticket volume for your help desk. Every provisioning and deprovisioning system, or every provisioning or deprovisioning action that used to require a manual ticket is now fully automated. So that's what it looks like when this gap is closed. Your lifecycle automation that runs from your IdP or your IGA system just gets fully extended to these disconnected apps. Next slide. So now that wraps up the formal presentation. I now want to open up the Q&A to the attendees. So start dropping your questions into the chat if you haven't already. And then Rick and I will be happy to answer those.
Yeah, Aaron, it looks like we have one here. And so, I mean, I think you can take this one out, but right off the gates, nothing like that, right? How is Cerby different from building a custom connector through our IdP?
I love this question because I used to build custom connectors. Great question. We hear this a lot because custom connectors are the traditional answer to this question. The challenge with custom connectors is the economics. I used to be a systems integrator, so we would charge anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000 building a connector for a given application, depending on the complexity. And that allows your IdP or your IGA solution to then automate actions in the applications. But when you factor in the scoping, the development, the testing, and the deployment, not only is it cost prohibitive, it just becomes really lengthy. It takes months to build this, test it, and get something that's actually production quality in place. And that's only just building it. The problem with traditional connectors too, like Rick mentioned earlier, is you need to provide upkeep and maintenance for it. So if the application changes its APIs, if they deprecate calls, who's on the hook for, updating that? Well, you are. And you have to hire consultants and professional services to come in and go through that whole process again. Cerby takes a fundamentally different approach, like what Rick talked about earlier. Instead of relying on SCIM or proprietary APIs, which many disconnected apps don't have, Cerby uses UI automation combined with agentic AI to interact with applications in the same way a human would, but automatically and at scale. So that means we can connect to virtually any application without the limitations of needing it to support SCIM or APIs. That the practical difference is we can onboard a new application in days because, like what Rick talked about, we're training this interaction right with our approach. So we can onboard a new application in days instead of months at a fraction of the cost. And the connectors that we have or the integrations that we have are self-healing. So that means when an application changes, and it will, the APIs will change, the UI will change. We use AI to detect that drift, and then we self-heal. So we'll correct it. Um, and we also have backups. So, like what Rick mentioned, we have a human in the loop process if, for instance, the AI can't make a definitive decision. So, our approach is faster to deploy, it's easier to maintain, and just presents overall dramatically lower TCO for customers. So, it's far less maintenance and headache for you.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Looks like we have one more, but I encourage you all to ask questions here. If you have them, I can probably take this one. It says, what about on-prem apps? I think you touched on this a bit, but can Cerby really automate those lifecycle management, automate lifecycle management for apps behind the firewall? And yes, the answer is we can. And we look at, again, those on-prem apps kind of falling into two categories: those that are browser based, right, or those that are more thick client based. Invariably, in many cases, Windows desktop apps, if you will. But yes, we can. And so the idea here is we have basically an agent-based model that allows us to support the ability to provide that same type of Cerby automation where we invariably have a funnel that's created with this agent to provide the Cerby automations that you'd expect. So you can perform the same, whether it's the lifecycle automations or even access automations, depending upon the situation, on those on-prem apps, just as you would with those that are SaaS. I think the discovery part of that, for the browser base, we can lean and leverage our browser extension. For those thick clients, it does require a little bit more exercise to gather the components to go and ultimately create the integration if we don't have it, as part of that. But on the whole, it is something that we see a number of our customers lean into because that's where they have a lot of their disconnectivity, and especially for large enterprises where you have a heterogeneous environment, invariably still have a number of those applications out there. It looks like we have a question here from one of the audience as well, and we've also got John Elton on here who might be able to assist with this one. There's a question here that says, in the demo earlier, how is the response time to app actions like group membership changes in Okta? John, as you hear that, I know there's ultimately lots of factors that could affect response time, but maybe what comes to mind as you hear that? Anything in particular that you would see being a bit closer to it than me?
Yeah, I think there's sort of at a high level, there's kind of two pieces there. I mean, first of all, from Okta or really any, sort of the upstream identity platform, where the SCIM connection is set to then connect to Cerby, that's going to be pretty much instantaneous. I mean, and so, for instance, in the demo where we would have clicked on that, added in the Paul Turner user into the group, it would have immediately sent the SCIM command out from Okta to Cerby, and we would have received it and started working on it. I think part of the bigger question probably though is okay, that's fine, but when Cerby receives it, how long does it take to go run the process to enact that request on the downstream application on the disconnected app? And so it's not instantaneous, but it's pretty fast. And so what you will see is that Yeah, it's going to be pretty quick in most cases. I mean, they're given, variability and things like that. It's pretty fast.
Yeah. No, thanks, John. There's another question that's come in here. It says, can Cerby handle apps that only just, I guess maybe only provide just-in-time provisioning, i.e., to set permissions once the user is created? And yes, the answer is yes, absolutely to that. And as I think touched on in a bit earlier, especially when you might be relying on, say, Okta or Entra, and you just want to push right at the time of the creation where someone needs access to the account, create the user, create the account, boom, go. We can handle that. It's just a question of how it aligns and where it originates from. But more often than not, it's just a question of doing so directly through and from, in this case, say, your IDP as part of that. Don, anything else to add or correct there?
No, I think that was spot on.
Okay. Okay.
I think there might be a
Okay.
nuance of that question. I don't know if the
Oh, we just got another question here. I'm sorry to interrupt. To clarify, curious if there's a polling period to Okta's system logs or basically a real-time streaming logs to Cerby. I don't know. Maybe I don't know, Jeff. The offhand, we might be able to follow up with you offline on that. Will, thank you for sharing that. Um, if yeah, let us confirm and get back to you on that specifically. Sorry, Aaron, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you want to expound on the other questions?
Oh yeah. So the previous question was around JIT provisioning. There's a nuance there. We can unpack if the person who asked the question wants to provide additional details. Were they specifically talking about SAML JIT provisioning into Okta, or into the app?
I well, I think for the benefit of the rest of the participants, perhaps we can also follow up with, in this case, Paul, offline. Paul, if you want to parse that further, let's happy to do so. But I think given where we are in the time, we should probably move to part here. Thank you all very much for taking the time to spend with us today. Hopefully you are educated and learned a bit more about Cerby and how we provide lifecycle automation. And Aaron, any last parting words from you?
Yeah. If today's session sparked questions specific to your environment, your app portfolio, your disconnected apps, your IDP, your governance challenges, the best thing you can do is to get a personalized demo, not just a generic product tour, and we can customize that for your needs. You can scan that QR code that you see in front of you, or just go to that URL. Rick and I are also happy to continue the conversation directly. Feel free to look us up on LinkedIn. So yeah, thank you all for your time and attention today. We know you have a lot of competing demands, so thanks for setting aside the time on your calendar. We appreciate it.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care.